Next up is our speaker for tonight. And I'd like to bring up Jason G., who will introduce our speaker.
Gotta be smarter than the stand. Hi everybody, my name's Jason, I'm an alcoholic. I'll tell you what, the energy in this room is just contagious. Yeah. You know, what a good time. Hope everybody got out and enjoyed the amenities, checked out the town, and what a good weekend. You know, I met Mike close to 20 years ago at a dignitaries meeting at St. James Church. And I tell you what, watched Mike over the years help lots and lots of people. He has a way with words that come across that are more receptive than just us alcoholics really like to be told what to do, right? Mike can hit you right over the head and do it to where it becomes receptive and you follow what he's saying. You know, Mike's opened his house over the years with poker and dinners and all kinds of stuff, and now he's got Nancy next to his side, so we're eating a lot better. We're eating really well. For me, man, when fear and doubt over the years have creeped in with me, Mike has always been there for me. And I've watched it happen all the time. He says stuff to you, he builds you up. He says stuff like, hey, you got a high intellect. Thanks for taking one for the team for that one, Mike. And then he says, you can do it. Go for it. And then he always follows it up with, we can do this shoulder to shoulder. And you know what? He means that. He goes along the journey with me. And I tell you what, it's helped me so much to be able to get through these trials in life that we go through. Last thing I want to say here. Mike is the real deal. Mike is a guy you see that's got 30 years sober, that'll still go to a meeting and put his stuff on the table, still put his shortcomings, still say, hey, I got 30 years, but I'm a human being, I still have shit happening, right? And to me, that's a martyr. To be able to see that happen just shows others that, hey, this is what we do. And if you know what I mean, you don't see that all the time in certain areas, right? So Mike, for that, I appreciate you. He's also, and I mean this from the heart, the best example that I've ever had of patience, tolerance, and love. I've had a lot of trials in my journey in this fellowship, and he's been there for me every step of the way. Sorry not to get a little emotional. I'm going to do my best. Mike, you're sitting there, you're surrounded right there. You got Molly to your right, you got Nancy to your right. Surrounded by the greatest fellowship in the world. Winning, right? Anyways, Mike, I love you. And I thank you for the opportunity of, having me introduce you. Everybody you internationally know, highly respected in this field, I give you Mike C.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Clark, and I'm an alcoholic. Okay. At 40 minutes, Nancy, please get my attention. At 45, Molly, start doing jumping jacks. My last drink was January 29th, 1993. And to be standing here tonight is just... Nancy and I have a migratory pattern to do 6 months in Oregon and 6 months here. And I got a phone call from Lansing when I was out in Oregon, and I walked into the living room, and Nancy said, "What's wrong, honey?" And I just started breaking into tears. And I've talked all over the world. I've traveled, I've flown 1 million miles. But there's something about this kind of talk that is so different than any other talk. To talk about the 12 principles tonight is very interesting because you don't hear much about them, but when you think about it, it's the stitching that makes up the fabric of who we become in this program. So let's go through them. When you start with the first principle, you're talking about honesty. And my family did a family intervention on a cold January in Michigan. I had just had a party that night. I cleaned up, gone to bed, and there was somebody knocking at the door, and I thought it was partiers coming back, and I thought, no, the party's over. I went to the back door, and it was my family. My brother from Seattle, my brother from San Diego, my sisters from Chicago, and I went, oh, no. I'm on the road. Oh, no, life is going to change very quickly. I ended up at St. Lawrence Hospital, and God bless Mike Randolph, who passed away. He was a tech there, and when I went through that program, Mike talked about honesty, but he would keep saying, Clark, you gotta be honest. Clark, you gotta be honest. And I thought, why does he keep saying that to me? Because I don't think we really know the depth of honesty when we first come in. It's something that we learn as we go along, I'm sure. Wow, get honest, Clark. He said it's like developing a muscle, that we have to keep working at it all the time. They say that the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is something that you must work forever. But I believe that the first principle is something that you must work forever as well. It's keep being honest throughout the course of our sobriety. I remember being in California at a meeting, and I remember a it was a woman's voice, and she was talking, and she goes, and you people that have been sober over 20 years, she said, you just stop being honest. You stop really getting into yourself and being honest. I thought, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I can't. I knew what was in that woman's voice tone, and I thought, no, not me. Dishonesty means you're divorced from yourself when you think about that principle. And honesty literally is the true antidote to relapse. Honesty is the one antidote to relapse. Honesty kind of brings in that issue of step zero. You know, the old guys used to talk about step zero. That happens before the 12 steps. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And they've always called that step zero. And if you come to Mason, Michigan, which is the county seat for Ingham County, south of Lansing and East Lansing, we're going to be having a retreat in October for us in fellowship, the men in our fellowship in Mason. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about at that retreat is living an examined life. Can we live an examined life? The second principle is hope. And if you said to me, Michael, what is hope? I would say, gee, I've got a pretty good idea of what hope is, and I probably would have come close. But they've done some pretty heavy research. Years ago, I used to write and author articles. I really loved what we called the strengths perspective. And this was in the helping professions, working with probation, parole, child welfare, addictions work, any kind of helping, healing role. The strengths perspective said to focus on what was right and how to use it rather than focusing on what was wrong and how to fix it. And when you think about the strength perspective, they've done a lot of research, and they did a research study on hope, and I was amazed at what they came up with. They came up with 5 constructs for hope. The first one was hope as wish, a desire, an outcome. I hope I can stop drinking. The second construct was hope as will, being inspired to live, to learn, to recover, that kind of, the depth of that inspiration. Hope is more than just a chance for cure. Sometimes you'll hear medical doctors saying, well, there's no hope. Get yourself ready. Even in the face of imminent death, there is dignity. and there is hope. It's not just about a chance for a cure. There's no hope. There can be meaningfulness and dignity even in the face of all of that. The third one is hope as way. Hope as way, which means it's not groundless, it's attached to something. So in regards to this, people hope in, they place their hope. And they place their hope generally in three realms. The self, that you have the confidence or that you can carry this off. The second one is hope in others, sponsors, people in the program that you trust, and finally, hope in a power greater than ourselves. Can you place your hope? The fourth one is hope as horizon, to see something better than what we have now. And people with a year or two, if I gave you a magic pen and paper and said, here, write what you want for your life, there's no way you would sell yourself short if you wrote it right now. And anyone who has a lot of years in knows that that's true. You would sell yourself short if you wrote down on that sheet of paper right now. It's seeing beyond your present circumstances. The idea of this too shall pass is part of hope as horizon. And then finally, there's hope as action. And you know that in our big book we have a chapter into action. Acting as if. It's beyond thoughts and feelings. It is the issue of not just what you say, but what you do. It is collective action or individual action, but it is action. The third principle is surrender or faith. And I see those as simultaneous terms, or I should say comparative terms. I give up versus I can handle it. I was part of a men's group that started in East Lansing. It's currently gone all over the country. I think it's in a couple of foreign countries now. It's called the Dignitary Sympathy Group, which was a misnomer on both counts. If you went in thinking that you were a dignitary or that you needed sympathy, you weren't going to get either. It was kind of a wild format, a lot of testosterone in there, which was once you shared, if anybody believed that you were thinking or doing in ways that would take you back to a drink, they believed that they owed you the truth as they saw it. The catch was, you could not rebut until the next week. And I know that one of the things that they used to talk about, I remember a guy sometimes saying, I can handle it. Oh, he shouldn't have said that. And they just went after him and said, we're alcoholics. We don't handle anything. Don't you get that? It's that issue of surrender. Surrender is going over to the winning side. That's what I heard in a meeting out in California. Going over to the winning side. And I know that before the 12 steps, the original formation of steps were the 6 steps. And the first step of those original 6 steps was ego deflation. So think now about way hope, self, others, and a higher power. You know that one of the, was it the second or third person in the door that went on an ill-advised trip to Europe right after he had immediately gotten sober in 35 or 34, had a relapse, and went to see the eminent psychologist Carl Jung. And I'm telling you, I come from that field, right? I come from the social work psychology field, and there's Freud, and there's Maslow, and there's Jung. And this guy went to see Jung, and he said to him, am I hopeless? And Jung said, yes, without a spiritual transformation, it's hopeless. But what I didn't know was that he sent a letter to Bill W. in 1961 before he passed. And in that letter, he described two main ways that one could recover from severe alcoholism. The first one was to have a profound spiritual experience. But the second one was to find the protective wall of the human community. I do a lot of national and international work in the addictions field, and a lot of times people will, I have never given up myself as an alcoholic in this program, unless it's one-to-one and for a good reason, but I've never done it on the stage. I would never do that. And I know that I've run into researchers who, when I've talked positively about AA, they say, well, you know what, the stats on AA are terrible. And I said, well, that's interesting because AA is anonymous and they don't let researchers in. So what happens is they get upset and angry and they publish negative, but they don't know. They haven't done this. But I was going to bring up a couple of articles from someone I really respect. His name is Dr. John Kelly from Harvard. I don't know John's status. I think I know, but I don't know. But I do know that he's probably one of the most preeminent researchers because what he does is he'll watch people who come into formal treatment programs that are also participating in the 12 steps, and he'll do research on them. And he finds good outcomes for people who are really paying attention in this program, as well as getting formal treatment in the community. You read these articles, and what you'll find is the fellowship put into so many big words you can't believe it, right? It's the, what do they say? The movement from pro-drinking social ties to that of pro-abstinent social ties. Okay, well, I know that is we need to get away from wet places and wet faces. And we need to pick up dry trash and dry places, right? So I understand that. But this protective and positive social influence is really throughout all of what we do. I really needed a meeting in New Zealand. I was a long way from home. I can get afraid or have some fear built up when I'm that far from home, and I went to a meeting. And in regards to this issue about why we sit in circles, a woman in New Zealand, in Christchurch, with a heavy New Zealand accent, my God, I could only understand about 70% of what she was saying, but she said, you know why we sit in circles? Because it's ancient. And she said, if you think about it, we sit in circles because we've always sat in circles because in the middle of the circle in ancient times there was warmth and food. But the other part of sitting in the circle is that animals that would come out of the dark forest, I could watch your back in that circle and you could watch mine. That's the protective wall of the human community, right there. And that's what happens here when we do this. You can watch my back and I can watch yours. And I need that. And we all need that. The fourth principle is courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is pressing on in spite of the fear. I have a Grapevine article that was published in 2017. There's copies out there by the coffee maker if you'd like one. I sent it in 5 years before 2017. Never heard anything. 5 years later, I went up to my post box in Mason, and I pulled out a copy of the Grapevine. I thought, it's probably some kind of, they wanted me to sign up or something. And there was a little page mark in it. I opened it up and it said, "Thank you." It was this article. 5 years later, I didn't know it was coming. And I was standing there looking, our car goes beep, beep. I'm standing out in the middle of the street by my postcard. Let's talk about courage. And I hope I can get through this one, because I'm going to talk about my father, Emmett. My dad was a very peaceful man. He had 3 little kids by the time World War II broke out. He was not given to that kind of patriotic fervor. He just wanted to be with my mother, Virgiline, and raise those 3 kids. He even quit his job so that he could take a job in Brighton, Michigan at a munitions factory, because he knew that they were not drafting out of munitions factories, but they drafted him anyway. And he went right over to Europe. He was in Patton's 3rd Army as a buck private. I said, when he came home in 1945, he stayed a whole other year at the Great Lakes Naval Hospital. Back then they called it shell shock. You know now, it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Matter of fact, I've got a brother that has always loved Chicago, and as soon as he retired from Ann Arbor, him and his wife immediately went to Chicago and bought a condo in a high-rise. And at a family gathering one time they said, "You know, Jerry, you know why you love Chicago?" He goes, "Because it's a happening town?" They said, "No, you were conceived here." He says, "I was not." They said, "Jerry, do the math. Mother took the train from East Lansing to Chicago. Do the math, Jerry." Late in his life, because he never talked about it, ever. Late in his life, we asked him if he would write it. And I'm not sure if we did the right thing to ask him. And I've listed some of it in here. And I said, "Dad, were you scared?" He said, "Oh, Michael, I was scared so much of the time." He said, "What I remember about the Battle of the Bulge is that it was the worst winter to hit Europe in 100 years before that week. It was frigid and cold, and it said, if you asked the sergeant to go to the bathroom, he would tell you to take someone with you because of snipers." And Dad said, "Michael, there were no snipers behind us. All the snipers were in front of us." And he said, "The reason I knew that the sergeant did that is it was harder to run away if you had someone with you." And he said, "But the worst part was running into fire. Leaving your foxhole and charging at oncoming fire, or leaving your transport truck to mortar or shell." He said that was the hardest. And he said something that I'll never forget, because he said, that's when you really wanted to be shoulder to shoulder with your past. And that, as you know, is in the big book. It is probably my favorite passage, and certainly Jason talked about it already. You are going to meet new friends in your own community, high and low, rich and poor. These are the future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will have escaped disaster together. And you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it is to give up yourself, that others may survive and rediscover life. That's just my favorite passage in the book. Absolutely. First year fear. Let's talk about first year fear. I can't tell you how many men in 30 years that I have sponsored, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard them finish this sentence in a myriad of ways. But I have to, Mary, Great job. Boy, I got it. When I was in the hospital all those years ago, it was all payphones back then, there weren't any cell phones. And I kept the group waiting to go to class. We had to go to a different part of the St. Lawrence Hospital campus to go to classes during the day to learn about alcoholism as a disease. And I kept the group waiting because I was on the phone. And I got my phone privileges yanked for 5 days, and I was angry. And the text said, "Why are you keeping people waiting? You know that this is a part of the hospital that if you were in any other part of the hospital with this kind of status, you would be in a bed with tubes coming out of you like this is a extreme care situation." However, and I said, I was on the phone to Michigan State University. He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm about ready to finish a master's in social work. I'm going to be a therapist, and I just wanted to, I'm in my last semester, and I just was trying to get this set up." And he looked at me. You know how somebody will say something to you so quickly that you know it comes right from their heart. You know it comes, they don't stop and even think about it. He said, "Mike, what do you want us to do with that diploma when you graduate? Should we mail it to you in Jackson Prison, or should we throw it in after your casket?" He said, "I would suggest you take a year off. And if you stay sober, if you can find good sobriety and stay sober, whatever you want to do, Mike, you'll be able to go do." And I'm going to tell you something. I did. That's not the way I'm put together. When I tell you I had flown 1,000,000 miles, you can imagine how much work I was doing to fly. There's only 3,000 miles from Boston to San Diego. To fly 1,000,000 miles, you live up there. I was not someone to take a year off, but I knew that person's tone of voice told me something would be on the other end of it. And I had the courage and took the year off. So people in that absolutely wild ride of the first year do things that are uncomfortable, do things that you just can't believe you would do if you have people you trust that keep suggesting you do it. Because there will be a payoff. There will absolutely be a payoff for you. The fifth principle is integrity. And you know, the interesting part about integrity is that I remember talking to a bridge builder, and a bridge builder used that term of integrity. And I said, "You're a bridge builder. Why would you be talking about integrity?" He said, "Oh, it has everything to do with weight limits. A bridge has no integrity if it doesn't have the weight limits." Well, if you think about load limits, addiction is so much stronger than we are. There is so much weight that is allowing us when we come into this program that we've got to be able to lighten our load. This is where the 12 steps are so important. It's back to that first principle, being honest and sharing. There was a neo-Freudian, I'm sorry, but I'm an old psychologist, social worker. There was a neo-Freudian by the name of Karen Horney. And Karen talked about the 3 major movements between people in regards to human hurt. She said, you can hurt people moving away from them. You can hurt people moving towards them, or you can hurt people moving against them. She said there are 3 major movements of hurt. Well, so if you think about integrity, it's all about how you handle that. I believe, and that's not the first thing that always comes to my mind, but if someone hurts me coming towards me, I need to forgive them. And I'll tell you something right now, those have been big issues for me in my 30 years in this program. I have hurt 2 or 3 men that I have sponsored. And they would have had every reason to cancel their relationship with me, straight up. And they didn't. Almost to the person, they said, Mike, you've made an amends. I just want you to think about why you did what you did, but let's stay friends. You know, when that happens, you start to learn about yourself. And that shows a type of friendship that you get here in this program. You just don't get elsewhere. You just don't. Someone moving away from you, hurting when they move away from you, let them go with God's love. Nancy has a saying that I think is wonderful. She says, I want them to eat. I just don't want them to eat at my table. Okay? And when people move against you, that's when we need to put down boundaries. Healthy boundaries. Yes, I am powerless over people, places, things, and situations, but I do not have to stay in close proximity to that which upsets me. We can put down boundaries and stop that hurt, and we need to protect ourselves. The sixth principle is willingness. To trust, to connect. If I could probably, I don't know, everybody's got a different take on this, but if I could tell you for all the men that I've sponsored over these 30 years that have gone back and drank, I would tell you it's probably because I just couldn't see them connect with other people in a way that was trusting and healthy for them. We have a saying in Mason, would you crawl across broken glass to stay sober? Would you crawl across broken glass to stay sober? Because sometimes you're going to be asked to do things like that uncomfortable. I mean, think about a chronic, life-threatening situation. I swear, if you brought a room full of people in here, and half of the room were terminal cancer patients, and the other half were chronic severe alcoholics, and you told them what they needed to do to live a whole, useful, and healthy life, the cancer patients would knock you down to get it, and the alcoholics would say, how many meetings? The seventh principle is humility. And I have two ideas about that. We are all travelers in this unnatural world. One of the things that the old guys used to say in those men's meetings were, son, this is an unnatural way to live. The birds fly, and the sun rises in the east, and we drink. That's how we are. And to not do that is to live an unnatural life. If you were in a foreign country that you did not know, would you be humble enough, sensible enough to get a guide? The second thing I want to say about that is, in regards to humility, it's not all about me. And I'm still working on that. I take offense to something that someone has done to me, and I grit my teeth and I think about it, and I think, why did they do that? What did I do? No. Most times, I swear, 98 times out of 100, it's not about me. It was a cry for love from them for whatever reason, but it really didn't have anything to do with me. Wow. The issue of humility. The old guys came to me when I was young, and I was a juvenile probation officer in my old life. I used to have a full head of hair until I did that job. I had teenagers of my own, but yeah. But I remember the old guys found out I was leaving my job at the court, and I was going to go train in the addictions field around the country. And they took me aside and they said, what are you going to do about your status in the 12 steps? I said, I'm not going to share. Good. We suggest you do not. You let what you say rise and fall on your own hard work and your research, and you let the rest of it go. And I'm so glad that they told me that. I'm so glad I did that. I've seen some other people on the national circuit not do that, and I've never respected it. And in regards to that, I told you earlier tonight that I would tell someone one-to-one, but never in a group. And I was out in Maryland, somewhere out on the East Coast, and I'd taken a mid-morning break, and a guy came up to me and said, you a friend of Bill W's? I said, yes, I am. It's just him and I, right? I said, yes, I am. I said, how did you know that? Did I say something? He goes, yeah, I caught some of your language and what you were saying this morning, but that really wasn't it. I said, well, what was it? He said, you know your styrofoam coffee cup? I said, yeah. He said, when you drain it, you put it all the way up to the ceiling. He said, how do you do that? Really, I wanted to do that. The other issue not about me is emotional reactivity. Good Lord, it hurts us. It hurts me so bad. I can get it, there's the 24-hour rule. The men in my area, as we work with each other, we have what we call the 24-hour rule, which means that when you are upset, you let it go for 24 hours before you respond. And anytime I've broken that, it's been in my peril. No, I don't need to, I'm not waiting tomorrow to send this email. I'm going to send it right now. No, I should have done that. The eighth principle is love. And I was so happy to find this principle within the 12, because it has been something that I've always said all through my years, that I think one of the most overwhelming, miraculous factors of Alcoholics Anonymous is the ability, it returns you to the ability to love. Because that's what alcohol steals from people. It steals the ability to connect to people. It ruptures the relationships that make us whole and human. And to be able to learn how to love again is absolutely a miracle. Because that is some sinister stuff that it takes away from you. The second one on the heels of that is the ability for self-love. Which is what? The final frontier for most all of us, whether we're in Al-Anon or AA, is the ability for self-love. I was about 2 years sober, maybe 3 years sober. The State Department had sent me to the island of Malta, off the coast of Italy, to talk to their judges about possibly putting in drug courts, which was brand new in the United States and really catching fire. And I was all done with my work. I was all alone. I was halfway around the world. I was in kind of an empty space. There was a liquor store right across from this park. And I realized that if I wanted to, I could go have a drink and no one would know. And then it hit me. I would know. That I had started taking up residence again inside of me. This ability to start to love yourself again through healing is just amazing. The big evidence of growth that I see in someone with coming into their first year and maybe even into their second year is the ability to confront the sponsor of their hurt. There is a landmark behavior. Can you confront someone that you care about in this program if your feelings have been hurt? Can you bring it up to them? Because that usually tells me that the person is doing a lot of work. The ninth principle is discipline. My sponsors out of this men's group told me to read 2 pages out of the big book every day, and I never should have asked why. Because we do. Because our sponsors do. and because their sponsors do, and we want you to do it. Because we, the Big Book tells us, we are an undisciplined lot, and we want you to find the discipline of daily work. And you know the other wild thing when you start talking about discipline, here's a wild thing about AA. If you leave the meetings, no one chases you. No one comes after you. Think about that. That's the most amazing. I remember my dad telling me when I was new and just away from home, my dad told me one time, Mike, no one's going to show up at your front door and tell you to go to the dentist. In Bucharest, I chose an English-speaking meeting, thinking that would put me in touch with what? People from Great Britain, Scotland, Ireland, English-speaking. No! In Europe, everybody speaks two languages, their own and English. It was the most cosmopolitan meeting I had ever been to. And I got there early because I wasn't sure where to go. And the woman that was helping to make coffee was from the Soviet Union. She was from Moscow. And in her broken English, she had told me that she had relapsed. And she said with some pain, I stopped going to meetings, you know? You know meetings? I stopped going to meetings, you know? Yes, I know. Whoa. Abstinence can happen in isolation, recovery cannot. The big difference is continuing to continue. Now here's something I want you to think about when you think about discipline. If someone has cancer and the cancer returns, no one says that the treatment failed. They say the cancer returned. But if you're a diabetic and you take insulin, which can let a diabetic live a full, healthy, productive life, if you're a diabetic and you stop taking insulin, and problems happen, they don't say the same thing, do they? No, that's here. That's us. We have a way. We know the way. I have to stay with my discipline. The 10th principle is patience, perseverance. The enemy of sobriety is, I want it right now. That lack of patience. In the Lansing area, we have a speaker meeting at St. Michael's in Holt. And by the way, who was from Holt up there? Yeah. There's a speaker meeting in Holt, and they brought an older man from Detroit area. He was weepy because he had just lost his dog. I was 90 days sober, and I thought, what does this guy have for me? He couldn't talk very loud. He was kind of frail. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he said, and you people with 90 days. He said, you want everything right now. It took you years to get here, and you want everything okay right now. Easy does it. Life is not a marathon, it's just a sprint, right? And think about just one day. Let's think about that. But come on now. 24 hours in a day. Back in the 30s and early 40s, they used to wear a camel pin as a kind of a hidden, like the fish, right? It was that hidden signal that you were part of the fellowship. Because a camel could go 24 hours without taking a drink. And think of what Bill and Bob did. They took previous to Bill and Bob in the 30s, they took a chronic, if not fatal disease, there's times you wished you would have died. And all they did, truly, was give you that human community, but they reframed the time you had to stay sober. One day. Can you make it till tonight? With help, can you make it till tonight? They reframed a lifetime into 24 hours. Which leads into the 11th principle of awareness. It is so connected to patience. But it's the world around us. That issue of awareness is what the old guys used to call it the squirrel crossing the telephone wire. And when I asked one of them to explain that, they said there is so much that happens in this world that you don't notice until you put down the bottle and you stop shaking and your eyes become white again and you can look around you. And what you can see are things that were always there and you just could not see them, like a squirrel balancing to cross a telephone wire. Remember that honesty is the true antidote to relapse. I think awareness is its partner. How are you doing now is something that I force my sponsorees to bring themselves back to when they're just fraught with an issue, fraught with a trouble. I'd say, stop now, just stop for a minute. How are you doing right now? There's a funny story about this. A couple of young kids from Michigan State, years ago, this must have been 28 years ago, they had a house right across from the East Club in Lansing, across 127, right on the edge of what was a distant part of campus. And this house was a sober house, baby, let me tell you. They had a Tuesday night meeting, and they would pack that house with young kids, young guys, young men and women from Michigan State, and teenagers who wanted this would stand in the kitchen for an hour and a half. They couldn't even see who was talking. They would stand in the kitchen for an hour and a half to listen to what was going on in that room. One time I was on a panel with the Ingham County Health Department, and I told them about that meeting, and they said, we want to recreate this. You can't recreate this. Oh, yeah, we can. I said, no, you can't. You can't, I can't, no, right? I just couldn't even tell them. But there was a guy there. There was an interesting meeting because Johnny L. was in that meeting. He was a skinny kid with nothing but carrot red hair. He ended up working for Pixar Films. He's a family man now in Northern California, and he wrote the chapter in the big book, the personal story, The Missing Link. And John was part of that meeting. But the story I want to tell you about awareness was Leo Mahoney. Leo Mahoney was a Catholic Irish boy from Cleveland, and it was a hot July day when we had this meeting. I mean, people were just sweating. There was like this little fan. It didn't move any air at all. And you're in a t-shirt and shorts and you're sweating. And Leo went off. He just went off. He says, I'm Irish. What am I going to do about St. Patrick's Day? My whole family. And he started crying and raging. And this voice from the kitchen said, Leo, dude, it's July. I have Leo's permission to tell that story. The 12th principle is service. There's two things there. We do it for ourselves, and we do it for the continuation of AA. Do you know that Mother Teresa, who worked with the homeless in Calcutta, weeping sores, open wounds, oh my Lord, with that woman and her nuns, and Mother Teresa said, no, I always did it. I did it for me. I did it so I could feel better about myself. And I know that that's important. I really do. There was a young guy who was he had been sober long enough to find out about jail meetings, and some of the older guys had brought him into the fold, and he went to jail meetings, and he would come to our meeting after being at a jail meeting, and he was like full of helium, and he was so happy, and then all of a sudden he caught himself, and he goes, oh, but I don't do it to feel better. And I stopped and I talked him down off that ledge. I said, it's okay to feel better. That's what we want to do. AA's continuation. Let's talk about the other part of that. Boy, did I like to see those two come up here for the countdown and thank Mark, and Mark thanking everybody else, because I'll tell you, you got to think about this, is that my son Steve is a soccer player. Matter of fact, he's playing tonight. He's the starting goalkeeper for the Houston Dynamos. They're in the championship playoffs. Steve's been a soccer player for 17 years, Europe and the United States. He was with me one time in Mason, and he said, "Dad, I know this is your life, but I've never been to a club. Can you take me to your club?" And back then, Mason, we had the treehouse, right? Before we have our home now, it was the treehouse back then. And I said, "Yeah, Steve, I know the thing to get us in. I can take you there." So I did. I took him to this upstairs apartment that we were using as a clubhouse. I showed him the whole thing. He kind of got it. And we got back in the car and we started to drive away. And he said, "Dad, you said this started in 35? I said, "Yeah, 1935, Steve, right around there." He said, "Okay, well then, who's the CEO?" I said, "Well, Steve, we don't have a CEO." "Oh, okay, well then, who's the governing board?" I said, "Steve, we don't have a governing board." He got mad. "Okay, Dad, I'm not saying it right, but if this has been going since 1934, 35, who's in charge?" I said, "Steve, as best as we know, God is. And all we do is try to help. And it's self-government, Steve. It's all done on volunteership." And he got real quiet, and he looked out the window, and he said, "How can that be? How can that be?" I'm going to close right now. Did I do okay? I want to close right now to talk about selfless service. And I'm going to talk about one of my favorite theologians, Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen was on Yale's divinity school. He was on the faculty. He was a Catholic priest. It's a Protestant divinity school. They didn't care. He didn't care. It just wasn't about that. And Nouwen at one point was hailed in a New York Times article as the world's emerging theologian. Okay, I'm telling you, when the New York Times says that about you, you're not emerging, you probably are, right? And I'm telling you what my response would have been is graffiti or what's that stuff? What had fallen from right? Balloons. No, what did he do? Nouwen went into his colleague's office and shut the door and broke down and started weeping. And he said, I can't believe I've let my career get this far off path. He resigned his post at Yale. He has spent the rest of his life working with handicapped street people in Montreal. 10 years after that article, the New York Times sent that reporter to find him. And he did it. After a few days of searching, he found him on the streets, working with handicapped homeless in Montreal. And he said, why have you chose to live the last 10 years in relative obscurity? Now he looked at him and said, obscure from whom? Right. When I think I know what selfless is, there's people that show me what selfless is. And I'll end with a blessing from Nouwen about the work that we do in this program. I've never forgotten it. I've committed it to the Gaelic language, the ancient honorable language of my Irish heritage. In Gaelic, his blessing about what we do in this program goes like this. Tasa an daiarai a sanrayak, a per sisin toil tanakobel, a sadamile parsis paran. And that means it is the truly, truly remarkable person who will work in another person's pain. We are people who not only work with our own pain and continue to work on it, but we work with other people's pain as well. And I believe we're doing that. Thank you so much.